Welcome everyone, it's Shari Carroll for SimonsStamp.com, and I have a mixed media project for you today. I'm going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to break down the techniques as I do them and kind of explain everything about the mediums that I'm using and how to get the best results. My first breakdown is preparing the surface. So regardless if you're using a canvas or chipboard or anything else, you want to prepare your surface. So I'm using a Holtz chipboard tag, and I'm going to prepare this with white gesso. Depending on the color that you want as your base, you could also use a black gesso, or if you want to preserve any colors or paintings that have color underneath, you can use a clear gesso. Gesso acts as a barrier and also a base that accepts other mediums on top. Also, gesso is different than white paint. It is a little bit thicker, so it has better coverage. And depending on the thickness, you could also apply it with a palette knife to create texture. And speaking of texture, for this project, I'll show you a couple ways that I like to add texture, one being with stencils and also tissue paper. So I'll start off with a stencil that has large open areas, and I'm using the Holtz texture paste with a crackle effect. And I'm using the back of the palette knife and just spreading it over areas of my tag through the stencil. This paste will give me the image of the stencil and also a crackle effect, which is an additional texture. And when you're done stenciling, be sure to put your stencil and your palette knife into a tub of water to help clean up the excess paste. Another way that I love to add texture is to use tissue paper, and I have regular gift wrap tissue paper that I've torn into manageable sizes, and I'm using a gel medium to apply to the tag. I'm only adding the gel medium into the areas where I want to add the tissue paper. Gel medium is a lot like glue, but it's quite a bit thicker, and it holds your items in place, especially heavier items, and it also acts as a top coat. And as a quick note for this tissue paper, it's going to accept my paints that I add later at a different rate than the paste will, so it'll give me a little bit different look. The next step for me is to start adding some color. You could use any color medium that you want. I have chosen Dina Wakley gloss sprays for this project. So my tag is completely dry, and how you can tell is that it is no longer cold to the touch. I'm just cleaning up some of my tissue paper by ripping it to the edge. And here's how that texture looks before we get started on the painting. Dina Wakley gloss sprays are unique in that they are acrylic, so they can be diluted while they are wet, but they are not water soluble once they're dry. These are a great base if you wanted to do other coloring techniques on top, especially once everything is dry. I've chosen my typical blue colors to do my project. You could definitely use different colors. You could use combinations of pinks and browns, or oranges and browns, or even a combination of pinks, purples, and blues. As I'm working with these sprays and diluting the colors, I'm also gaining new mixtures of colors as I go. While you're adding your paints, be sure to let the drips drip to the sides and also blot with a paper towel to lighten areas as you desire. And next up are some small details to add while your project is still in your splat box. Adding splats and dots of color is one of my favorite things to do, and it's really easy by opening the lid to your gloss sprays and just adding little drops of color here and there. This one I'm using the white, and you can also use your darker colors. I'm a huge fan of texture, so I'm going to add additional texture to the top once my paints have dried. Now that my project is dry, you can see how the color has seeped under that tissue paper and also around the stenciling. I'm adding some strips of mummy cloth, and I've pulled them apart a little bit so they're kind of imperfect. And I'm attaching these to the tag using some gel medium. I'm using it below and then also a little bit on top just to push it right into the project. I love additional layers, and I also like to add a little bit of meaning, and it's only something that I would know, but I'm adding 3 strips, and that's basically for my husband and my 2 sons, and I always like to put something personal, only that I would know, into my projects. Next up, I'm going to show you a really quick way to add some foil and glittery accents. I'm using the Ranger foils and a little bit of a glue stick, and I'm just rubbing my glue stick over parts of the project, and then I'm rubbing over with some foil colors that match my tag. When you drag your glue stick over the top of your project, it's going to hit the higher areas of your texture which will give you really great highlights. Next up, I want to remind you to add some texture to your focal points as well. I'll be adding a Tim Holtz frame to this project, and I've used a palette knife and some of the crackle paste to add some aging to the frame. To glue this onto the tag, I am using my hot glue gun, and I've just gone around the edges, and I can align this in place and then press it down. Next up is a really quick tip on how to do some enhancing details to really change the look of paper. I'm using the Tim Holtz typewriter die as the main focus to my project, and I am going to be using some silver gilding. This is really easy to apply. You just dab your finger into the jar and rub it right onto the paper. This will give this quite a bit of an aged look and a little bit of shine. And one of the final steps is to do the assembly. I'll be using some foam dots to assemble my typewriter into the project, and I'm going to put these on the very corners. These are the small ones. And then for the center, I'm going to add some larger ones, and I'm going to double these up so they sit inside that frame and it'll sit level with the outside. Using foam dot adhesive or any type of strip adhesive always gives you a nice dimensional look, and it adds a lot more to your projects. Once the body of the typewriter is in place, I'll again use some foam dots and add the secondary piece right on top. And to add a top piece to this, I have die cut You Are Loved from Simon Says Stamp, and I've added it to some acetate so you can see the color and texture inside the frame. And to finish this off, I'll go over my final details. I have used my white gesso to paint the reinforcer piece and also around all the side edges. And while I was at it and I had paint on my brush, I dry brushed over the front in some of the areas to mute out the color. I also added some of the Tim Holtz small flowers to the top of the frame and also inside the typewriter, and finished it off with a couple of the hearts that were left over from the You Are Loved die. I hope you've enjoyed this project. I have all my supplies listed in the description box below and a link to our blog post. And as always, thanks so much for watching.